The digestive system will be assessed on this model. First terms are extrinsic salivary glands. Here is one salivary gland, a second, and a third. Extrinsic salivary glands. If we pass through the thoracic cavity, we get the heart out of the way, what we can see is the end of the trachea. Your next term is esophagus, which is posterior to the trachea. The esophagus passes through the diaphragm into the abdominopelvic cavity. What we are going to do next is remove the liver. This is the liver. We'll come back to that in just a second. We can see back here that the esophagus enters into the stomach. Okay, so passes food into the stomach. Right? From the stomach, food is going to enter into the large intestine. So in order to see that, let's get the stomach out of the way. It passes through your next term, the pyloric sphincter. And this right here is the pyloric sphincter. It controls the flow of food from the stomach into the small intestine. All right, what we can see next is the duodenum, or the duodenum. This is the first part of the small intestine, and we will come back to that in just a moment. Before we get to that, I want to point out that the pancreas is posterior and inferior to the stomach. So this here is the pancreas. It is releasing digestive enzymes and digestive juices into the duodenal lumen. All right. What is also entering the duodenal lumen are secretions from the liver. Right, so let's go back to the liver here. If we look at the inferior aspect of the liver, what we see is this muscular sac called the gallbladder. And this is what stores bile, which is then secreted via the common bile duct into the duodenum. Okay. All right, so back to the duodenum. All right, the duodenum is the first and shortest part of the small intestine. It is actually going to pass behind the intestines. It is retroperitoneal. All right, so here is the duodenum. Right. Flipping back around, the next section of the small intestine is this right here. This is the jejunum. And finally, we have the ileum. Okay, the ileum is going to pass food into the large intestine, and the large intestine wraps up and around and ultimately is going to release feces out of the anus. All right, so before we get into that, I'm going to remove this piece right here. And what we can see is, first of all, this little triangle here is called the ileocecal valve. It makes sure that food flows from the ileum into the large intestine and not the other way around, not from the large intestine back into the ileum. All right? So generally food is going to flow up over here, and before it does so, it's going to mix with bacteria stored in the cecum. So this little blind-ended outpocketing down here is the cecum. All right, so again, cecum, ileocecal valve, and then this is the beginning of the large intestine. This is called the ascending colon or ascending colon, right, because food, or at this point waste, is going to ascend. Next, it is going to pass transversely across the abdominopelvic cavity. That is the transverse colon. Food is then, or waste at this point, is going to descend down the descending colon. And let's flip this around one more time. We can see that in order to get to the rectum, which of course is in the middle of your body, so medial, the descending colon actually comes back up and forms kind of an S shape. So this here is part of the sigmoid colon. To see the other part of the sigmoid colon, we have to go back here where it has been hypothetically cut. So this is the end of the sigmoid colon leading into the rectum. Okay. Couple more terms to note. First of all of this connective tissue back here in epithelium, these are called the mesenteries. They're what house blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, fat, nerves that are going to and from your intestines. So your mesenteries, they are technically considered to be their own organ as of very recently. Okay. A couple other things that we can see back here. Note that this is the ascending colon. This little bump down here is the cecum, and sticking off the end of the cecum is this little tail that looks a little bit like a worm. This is called your vermiform appendix. All right, and last structure I want to point out on this model is this what is called lacy curtain. This actually covers over the entirety of your intestines down here. It is a double layer of mesentery tissue, it's a double layer of peritoneum, and it houses a lot of fat. And essentially this lacy curtain is there to essentially provide extra padding, extra insulation to your intestines, but also in the event of a hernia, the greater omentum will be herniated as opposed to cutting off part of your intestines. So this lacy curtain is called the greater omentum. Again, this is the digestive system.